You're listening to Parasearch Radio with paranormal news, views and reviews from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web at Parasearch Radio. The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch UK Radio or its affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to the KTPF Reload show. In case you're wondering what the Reload show is about, if you haven't heard previous shows, these are the interviews that were conducted by good friends of mine, Steve and Sue Taggart, in the days of the KTPF radio show. Their own radio show ran for just over 4 years, broadcasting every week for over 3 hours. I joined them in the last 18 months of the show's run, but eventually the guys felt they'd just about had enough. It was a monumental effort to keep broadcasting every week for 3 hours. It was a wonderful show. But unfortunately they're no longer involved, and the shows have just sort of sat in the archives, so I thought it would be nice to bring them back to life and bring you the interviews that the guys conducted over those 4 years. They include some of the most interesting people within the world of the paranormal and some not so well known but still, nevertheless still very interesting. We even have 1 or 2 rather unusual shows, including a live seance and other things along those lines. Anyway, hopefully you enjoyed tonight's show, and this is the KTPF Reload show. Enjoy.
This program deals with themes of an adult nature and is intended for a mature audience. They've landed.
You're in the right place. Online, on the web, and on air. All over the world.
Talk radio.
You hear us, we hear you.
Yeah, welcome to the KTPF Community Talk Show, live and uncensored from Manchester. My name is Suzanne.
And I'm Steve.
And over in Essex, we have our regular co-host, Andy Mercer. Good evening, Andy.
Hello there, how's things?
Yeah, not too bad at all. We've had a busy week, but I don't know what the hell we've done. But it's seemed quite busy. Pull up a chair and relax with us while we bring you a show full of the supernatural, the paranormal, and other strange phenomena. Now, just to let you know what's coming on tonight, we've got Brian Langston on the show. Brian was born in Wolverhampton in 1960 and left the Black Country to join the Thames Valley Police at the age of 19. He served for 30 years in both uniform and CID roles within the forces and rose to the rank of Assistant Chief Constable responsible for operations including responsibility for firearms, public order, civil emergency and royalty protection. More recently, he has focused on writing and is pursuing a long-standing interest in history, mystery and the paranormal. He is a member of the regular columnist of the Ghost Club and has written numerous articles for the Ghost Club Journal and other paranormal publications. His first book, True Ghosts and the Ghouls of Windsor and Eton, is due for release next year. And his current project is about London murder stories, which he examines historical murders committed across the capital over the last 350 years. I wonder if our Jack's in that lot. But we'll find out more about that later. So we'll be speaking to Brian about all that and find out why he got into it and whether he had any stories to tell us from whilst he was actually serving in the police force. Might be quite interesting.
Which is adding people.
We're going to the south of France now. We're going to speak to Brian Langston.
Where's my sun hat? It's got to be a lot warmer than it is here.
It's got to be. Good evening, Brian. Are you there?
Bonjour Sue, bonjour Steve and Andy.
Bonjour. Comment ça va?
Yes, ça va.
Bon, très bien.
Stop showing off.
That's about as far as I go.
Bon night de douche, bon night de douche.
Stop now. Good evening, Brian. It's nice to have you on the show.
About the only thing I can say is Fruella the Mush. But I'm not even sure that's right.
Thanks, folks. Delighted to be with you, and thank you for inviting me.
That's okay, my love. And the reason why we've got you on the show is because you are into the paranormal, obviously. But first of all, you're originally from Wolverhampton, but you now live in France. Can you tell us a bit about your background, Brian?
Yes, I was a council house kid in Wolverhampton, living on a really what they'd call a priority neighbourhood now. It's not exactly what we called it at the time.
No.
But a lot of the friends got in trouble with the police and stuff, and we managed to stay on the straight and narrow. And I tried to join the police in the Midlands, but they didn't really like the people on our estate too much, and so I never got in. And I just got married. I was only 18. Stuck a pin in a map and ended up in the Thames Valley, down at Aylesbury, and I've spent the following 30 years down there. And retired about 5 years ago and moved out and now doing all the things that I've never had time to do over the past 30 years, really, including sort of paranormal research.
Now, during your time in the force, I believe you interviewed the likes of Sutcliffe and the Crays at Broadmoor, or at one of the Crays at Broadmoor. This must have been interesting to you, you know, and maybe fed your interest into other things.
Yes, it was. That was a paranormal experience, really, going to Broadmoor.
I bet it was.
Yeah, it was like going and visiting Bedlam. You know how you would imagine Bedlam to have been.
Mm.
A little more organised, but still a very, very strange place.
Yeah.
We had to go there and interview a number of their patients, as they call them, not inmates or prisoners, patients. Because of an incident that happened there. And it had happened on the landing where Ronnie Cray lived, and so did Peter Sutcliffe. So we had to go and interview them. And I've got the dubious distinction of being offered a cup of tea by Peter Sutcliffe, which I declined. But he was a pathetic individual. You know, all this aura that's built up around him. And he really was a pathetic-looking person, and the sort that you wouldn't look at twice if you passed him in the street, you know, for the monstrous image that he's got now. He really was an insignificant toad. Ronnie Cray, on the other hand, was completely different. We had to make an appointment to go and see him. He ran the place. He really did.
I bet.
So we went there, and I can remember his cell was guarded by what seemed to be a 7-foot-tall ginger Irish gay prisoner who said, "Have you got an appointment?" And in Irish, and we said, "No, we'd just like to have a chat with Mr. Cray." "Well, he's busy at the moment. You're going to have to make an appointment." So we had to make an appointment to go back and visit him a few days later. And of course, the staff were really worried that we don't upset the patients at all.
Yeah.
So we had to comply, and we went back and I interviewed him about the incident that had taken place in there. And then he got a very low boredom threshold, and before too long got quite bored and told me to foxtrot Oscar. Maybe not quite so politely, and we did actually. But yeah, quite a really menacing figure. There was something really creepy about the guy.
I bet there was. Now,
so that was interesting.
So, you've had a lifelong history, as I said in the top of the show, both in history and the paranormal. During your time as a police officer, did you get any stories of unexplained incidents and sightings of ghosts, or maybe UFOs?
Well, yeah, I was just listening to your cryptozoology bit there, Sue, and we got a phone call not long before I retired, so it must have been probably about 2008.
Yeah.
I was in the control room, and this woman phoned up from a very posh part of Maidenhead called Monkey Island. It's a little place on the river at Maidenhead. There's a beautiful hotel there now, Monkey Island Hotel. She was looking out of her bedroom window across her lawns and swore blind, this was 10 o'clock in the morning, swore blind that she could see a lion, a female lion. So we raced around there, of course, absolutely nothing at all. We interviewed her, and she was, convinced that these were, a sensible, intelligent woman, and convinced that she'd seen this lion, but it had disappeared by the time we got there. But one of the things that I put in the book was another cryptozoology, and as you say, they are few and far between.
Yeah.
But one of my colleagues, I'll talk about it a bit later on if you want, saw something very weird, not far from Monkey Island either. Very unusual, which she thought was a werewolf.
Really?
Yeah, she made the mistake of telling everybody at the Nick, of course, and they made her life a misery for the subsequent 10 years.
God.
But a very, very creepy encounter she had as well.
Bloody hell.
So we do get lots of strange things reported. I've never seen anything that I couldn't find an alternative explanation for.
No.
But I have heard something. And when I was doing some police training as a superintendent, probably about 10 years ago, I was at the police staff college at Brams Hill, a beautiful old Jacobean manor house.
Yeah.
I think it's built about 1604 or something, but it's just a gorgeous manor house. It's supposed to be haunted, and it's one of the 2 or 3 places in the world which is associated with the legend of the Mistletoe Bride. Do you know that one?
No, I don't.
This is the story where several hundred years ago, a young bride gets married, and on the eve of her wedding, while all the festivities are going on, they decide to play hide and seek. So she goes off in her wedding dress and hides somewhere in the manor house, and the guests all have to find her. Anyway, she went off and hid, and the guests started to find her, and after an hour had passed, they couldn't find her. 2 hours went by, still nothing. 3 or 4 hours, and now this wasn't funny anymore. And actually, they never did find her. And put a bit of a dampener on the wedding, shall we say?
Yeah.
But she was never seen again. That is until about 50 years later, where subsequent families were pottering about in the loft, and they found this massive trunk in the attic. Opened it up, and there was the body of the bride, is now a skeleton, in a wedding dress. And the big trunk had got like a lock on it, so as soon as the lid dropped, it locked it, and she just couldn't get out and died there. Well, of course, subsequent to that, after the wedding, there was a ghost associated with the house, and that ghost has been associated with the house ever since, and we're talking, a couple of hundred years. Well, I went to Bramshill House on several occasions, and of course, always been interested in ghosts and spooks. And where she was supposed to walk was what was the long gallery, and it's now the library. And it's got a beautiful library, absolutely beautiful. So I used to go up there when I was on courses and things. I used to go across there at midnight and sit there and wait and see whether I could see anything, but never saw a thing. Did this for years and years. But as I say, about 10 years ago, I was there on a course and I'd got some studying to do. So I was in the library at about 10 o'clock at night, and I was on my own in there and just doing some studying, ready for a presentation the next morning. And we'd had a guided tour of the house that day. And during the Second World War, Goering had visited, or just before the Second World War, Goering had visited Bramshill House when it was in private ownership. Loved it so much that he thought, when we invade England, this is going to be my country seat. So he'd ordered the Luftwaffe not to bomb anywhere around Hampshire at Bramshill House, because that was going to be his house. And this guy did really interesting. This guy did talk, told us the story of the Mistletoe Bride and stuff. And then they took us into this room, which they said, this is the very room that Goering slept in. And it was an office now, but so his bed was over there and blah, 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 blah. But it was very atmospheric. Anyway, I'd been working in the library, so about 10 o'clock, and just off the library was this Goering's room. And I thought, I'm going to have a potter in there and just go and have a look again. A beautiful room. So I left my studies. Nobody else in the library at all, not a soul. In fact, nobody in the house, because all the students were accommodated elsewhere. So I went into into Goering's room. Now, as you go into it, the door opens outwards onto a narrow corridor. So in order to get past the door along this narrow corridor, you'd have to shut it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the door opens outwards, and then as you go in, there's another door that opens inwards. So it's like a double door.
Mm.
Anyway, I was in there just looking around, thinking, "Blimey, fancy Goering with you." I'm just looking at it, and all of a sudden I heard what I describe as a purposeful footstep coming along the narrow corridor. And I thought, oh, bugger, it's the bloody security guard on his nightly patrols. He's going to wonder what the hell I'm doing in this office, because it's, private offices. I couldn't really have been in there. I should have stayed in the library. And I heard this sound like material rubbing together, like somebody that was wearing something long and satiny.
Yeah.
Just brushing together. And it came closer and closer, and I could hear the footsteps clearly on the carpeted corridor. I thought, oh, bugger, I've got to think of an excuse now. It's going to be quite embarrassing. He's going to say, what are you doing in here? And my mind was racing, trying to think of a plausible story. Thought, any minute now, he's going to come in. Anyway, he didn't come in. And the outside door, which I could see, didn't budge either. So I thought, hang on, what's he done? Has he stopped outside then? Because he's never gone past. Anyway, I looked out, nothing there at all. And he hadn't gone past. And so I came out, went into the library, just, in case there was another route into the library, which I knew there wasn't. But, your mind does start racing and doing illogical things sometimes. Nobody, not a soul about. Now, whether or not that was the rustling of the wedding dress of the mistletoe bride, I don't know. But it was something which I definitely heard, and I definitely couldn't explain. And that's probably the only thing that personally happened to me that, what I've been on my own and nobody else has been present. So
maybe it was very odd.
Yeah, but put the wind up me, I have to say. But when you realise, you think that was very, very strange.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the dawn of realisation, and then your hackles start to go. Then you think, what the hell was it? Yeah. And to this day, I don't know.
We've got Andy in Essex. Andy, do you want to come in here?
No, I was going about Herman Goring an address.
Pardon? Sorry, Andy, I missed that.
So maybe it was Herman Goring himself, perhaps in an address.
Yeah. Well, he was partial, wasn't he? He was that way inclined, I think.
Yeah, especially weaving past his satin dressing gown.
Didn't sound like a goose step, though.
I imagine Pete's steps were rather heavy as well. It was quite a large.
Well, I thought it was going to be the security guard coming in saying, "That are your papers." But, no, it's very odd. Very odd.
So since you've retired, you've indulged in your love of ghost stories.
I have.
Yeah, you have. And I believe it's led you into some hard-hitting cases that have been forgotten.
Well, I mean, we enjoy researching cases that have been forgotten. I mean, because I was the police chief at Windsor for many years.
Yeah.
And, I was at Windsor from a sergeant up to chief superintendent, so I'd been there a long time and knew the place well. And even as a young sergeant, I used to go around the pubs, purely professionally, you understand, making sure they were complying with the licensing regulations.
Yeah.
But Eton High Street, if anyone knows it, is just wall-to-wall pubs. Well, it was until the brewery crisis hit. But it used to be, every other shop was a pub. And they'd all got ghost stories to tell. It was absolutely fascinating. I always thought then, this was about 1985, I thought I'm going to collect all these stories, and one day I will write a book. I didn't think it would take me 25 years to get round to it, but I've collected about 200 stories, I reckon, from Eton and Windsor, which have all gone into the book. And one of them, a fascinating one, involving a copper. Actually, it was just it was at the time of the last war, and there was a policeman that used to patrol Eton High Street, and he got a regular little tea stop down at where he used to go and visit the night shift workers down near the river.
Yeah.
And he used to cycle down there, and they could hear the freewheel of his bike clicking as it came down the cobble streets. And every night they could hear this click, click, click of his bike, and they'd think, oh, it was old Charlie, let's get the kettle on again. And he used to go there and spend a couple of hours with them catching up on the latest gossip and stuff. Well, at the height of the Second World War, he was doing this. He was down at the waterworks at Eton. And this one night, the workers heard the familiar sound of the bike approaching, and then they heard the bike stop, and then they heard the sergeant get off his bike and the gravel, the footsteps walking along the gravel towards the mess where they were. They put the kettle on, but the door never opened. He never came in. And I thought, oh, that's queer. Perhaps he'd been called away on a job or something. So they thought nothing of it. And then the next night, the same thing happened again. They could hear it coming on. They put the kettle on, hearing it off, and walked across the gravel, but the door never opened. And they all thought it was rather strange. And then when the early shift came on, they mentioned this. They said this has happened 2 nights running now. And he went pale, the early turn bloke, and he says, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, we thought it was Charlie, and we've heard him the past 2 nights, and yet neither night has he come in." And I said, "Oh God, hadn't you heard? Old Charlie died a couple of weeks ago." And it's really odd that ghostly cycle, was heard for ages afterwards, and still apparently he's heard around the town today. I used to be on foot patrol down Eaton High Street, and used to listen for old Charlie's bike, but unfortunately I never did hear it.
Now, you mentioned your book, that's True Ghosts and Ghouls of Windsor and Eton. When is it released? Well,
all I can tell you at the moment, Sue, is that it's next year.
Right.
I was hoping to be able to give you a release date today, but I've been in touch with the publishers, and they can't tell me just yet.
Right.
So
okay.
Within the next few weeks, I should get a specific date, so I'll be able to update you or something on the website.
Yes, do that. Put it on. Put it on the Facebook page and let everyone know when it's coming out.
Okay.
I know that feels.
Go on, Dandy.
I know that feels, Brian. I've got a book coming out that should have been out a couple of months ago, and it's still.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
well, I mean, the first book I've ever written, Andy, and I didn't realise what a long-winded bloody process it was.
Be amazed.
It was this time last year that I started it. I finished it by Christmas and sent it to the publisher in February. Yeah. And I've heard within the last couple of weeks that definitely we'll have it, and it's next year, but I can't give you a date yet.
Well, that's an
awful long time.
Narrowed down to a year is obviously quite effective. I wrote my book originally 15 years ago, so.
Yeah. It's been incubating. It's been incubating for 25 years.
Yeah. Maybe you should have wrote about ghost stories, Andy.
Yeah. Right. So you also are a regular member and columnist of the Ghost Club.
Yeah.
How did you get into that?
Well, to be honest, considering I've been interested in the supernatural and paranormal all my life, I'd never heard of the Ghost Club until I'd retired, and I just think they're really missing a trick.
Yeah.
I have told them, but they don't seem to want to listen. They've got such a fantastic brand. Going back to, 1860 or something like that. I mean, it's probably the oldest ghost club in the world. And some wonderful alumni in amongst it. And I just think their brand is so under-recognised, really. So I've been doing what I can to plug it for them. And as I say, I write for them every month now.
Because it's been going quite a long time, the Ghost Club, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. Yeah, well, getting on for 150 years, I think.
Yeah, and like you say, it's very not known. So
no, there was a bit of a schism, I understand, some years ago, and the Ghost Club sort of split into 2 halves, 2 factions.
Yeah.
And one went one way and one went the other. And I don't know all the politics of it, but I certainly think they're missing a trick. They could be doing an awful lot more. Because they've got a wonderful brand, and yet they should have a lot more members than they've got. They do some great stuff.
Yeah, this is it. So.
But yes, you talked about we like digging up old stories and long forgotten ones.
Yes.
And there's one that I came across. It isn't in the book, but it's in another book that I'm researching, which has got a working title at the moment of Professor Pyewacket's Compendium of Mysteries.
Okay.
But it's just an umbrella term that I can dump everything in it that I like.
I was going to say, where did that title come from?
I don't know, God knows what genre they'd put it under, but it's the sort of book that I'd like to read. But all sorts of things in there, like spontaneous human combustion and plagues of frogs, and the one I was going to tell you about was a teleportation.
Oh, yeah.
A really early case of, perhaps alien abduction or teleportation from Cornwall in 1687. and I come across this looking in the Bodleian Library's records of old pamphlets, and it's only a one-sheet pamphlet, and there isn't a lot of detail in there, and it's frustrating because there's so many, especially as a cop, there's so many questions that you want to ask the witness, that aren't there in the paper. But it happened, say, over 300 years ago on Bodmin Moor, a little village on Bodmin Moor, and there's a chap there called Jacob Mutton, great name, and he was a young servant who was employed by the rector of a village called Hardingham in Cornwall. Apparently a nice young chap, very honest, hard-working, reliable, and all sorts of stuff. Worked for the rector. And then on Sunday the 8th of May, 1687, at about 8 p.m, so he's very precise, he decided to go to bed. He went to bed early. Went upstairs to bed in the rectory. And in the bedroom, he shared with another guy who also worked at the rectory. Anyway, he started to get undressed, did young Jacob. And then he heard a strange noise, and he stopped and listened. It was what he described as a hollow voice saying, "So ho, so ho, so ho." And he listened intently, and then he realised the voice was coming from the room next door. So he went into the room, opened the door, and again heard the same strange noise, "So ho, so ho, so ho." And he could tell it was coming from the window. So he went over to the window and looked out, but couldn't see a thing. And the last thing he remembers is leaning on the window frame, and there was a metal bar going across the window. And that's the last thing he remembers, because as soon as he touched that metal bar, he disappeared.
Oh, wow.
Please don't tell me they found him in Soho.
Well, not far off, actually. It wasn't quite that far, but it was 30 miles away. The next morning, they find a metal bar on the floor, 17 foot below. It's a high window, but there's no sign of Jacob at all. And at the same time, the next morning, he's waking up dazed and bruised, 30 miles away. Yeah. He hasn't got a clue where he is, totally unfamiliar surroundings, and he's also holding an iron bar as he staggers to his feet. He asks where he is, and then there's this crowd of people coming towards him who are going along this narrow country lane on the way to the village market. And this is a town called Stratton, near Bude in Cornwall. And they say, well, you're 4 miles outside Stratton. And he's never been there in his life before, never been to Stratton, and it's 30 miles from home. Yeah. Haven't got a clue how he got there. So they realise that there's something up with poor Jacob, and so they take him to Stratton with them and look after him and give him something to eat, and he regains his composure, and then they set him off, walking back towards Bodmin again. And it takes him 2 days to walk back. And he gets back home to the rector, who says, "Where have you been?" And we've been worried about you, and tells him about his strange experience. And but they thought his demeanour had changed, because he was described as a brisk and cheerful fellow. But when he came back, he was subdued and melancholic, and he could hardly remember what had happened. The only thing he could remember is that he'd seen a tall man who had taken him over hedges without weariness or hurt. He couldn't remember, whether he was holding the iron bar, or whether the tall man was wearing the iron bar, or what happened to the tall man. And that's where it ends. So, there's lots of unanswered questions. If only you could get your hands on the witness. Who was he? And what happened to him after? And how long did this melancholy last? And, who was the mysterious stranger? What does he mean, flying over hedges? Is the rectory still there? So I'm not even quite sure where exactly this rectory is.
Yeah.
Did the experience change him in any other ways and stuff? But it's really interesting, and has, when you read it with 21st century eyes, you think, actually, that could have been an alien abduction, So it's things like that. I love finding things like that.
Yeah. Did you find it very frustrating that these questions weren't asked?
Yes. Oh, yes, definitely. I turned the pamphlet over thinking, oh, this is good. I'm really enjoying this. What happens next? And there's bugger all there. So, that's it.
Do you find that ghost hunting is very much like detective work, Brian?
Yeah, very much. Yeah, one of the main differences in detective work, one of the primary rules we've got, there's a thing called Lockhard's Law, and that says that every contact leaves a trace. you know, which is like fingerprints and DNA and all that sort of stuff. But in the paranormal world, actually, not always does every contact be traced. Sometimes there aren't any traces there.
No.
You know, and so you have to rely on other detective skills, really. And I mean, some of the main ones, it's that sense of curiosity. I mean, cops do love a mystery and they like problem solving. That's why we joined up. We've got an inquiring mind and a logical mind. So you've got to be patient. More than anything, I think you've got to be open-minded and never assume. You know, you look for corroboration by all means and look for inconsistencies, but don't be judgmental. You know, and be meticulous. Make sure that you just follow all the leads and do it systematically, really. But sometimes there are huge holes because, of course, the witnesses sometimes aren't alive anymore. Sometimes the locations aren't there anymore.
Yeah.
Sometimes there ain't any corroboration. You know, and so you're just left with professional judgment. But in my experience, there aren't that many people that completely make it up.
No.
You know, they genuinely believe they have seen something, and actually a lot of the, you know, the more credible stories that I've come across are people who really didn't want anybody else to know about it. So in the book, there's several stories in the book that I've never seen the light of day before, because people have confided in me, and I've changed their names and addresses and so on.
Yeah.
To protect their identity.
Right.
But I mean, my wife is very, very sensitive to these things, and she's one of the reasons I've been so interested. Because throughout our life, she's had things happen to her.
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier my experience at Bram's Hill. That's the only thing that's really happened to me on my own. All the other experiences always happened because Jen's been with me, I think. We've had some very, very strange goings on during the course of our married life, and including some reports, you know, where things are brought to you. Really interesting. Yeah, well, there's what we got. My wife was an antique dealer, and we bought a massive shed. I mean, it wasn't an ordinary shed; it was a humongous shed, 20 foot wide by 40 foot long, and it used to be packed with all sorts of old antique stuff and furniture and things. And we bought it second hand off a guy that I knew, and it was very cheap. But it seemed to have a character of its own. It's hard to describe. It seemed to have a personality. Because sometimes you went in it was perfectly normal. Other times you went in it and you felt as though you were trespassing, and you know, it felt really creepy, as though it didn't want you to be there. So we just used to lock it up and go back out again until the atmosphere returned. Well, it was packed to the gunwales with all sorts of stuff. And this one day we went in. There was two incidents actually. One, we went in and Jen's mum had died, and so we'd had to clear her house, and we also bought a load of her furniture in and packed it all in the shed as well. And we had to clear it from Wolverhampton and just bring it down and sort it out in the shed over the month. Well, on this one day, she was sorting through this little box of jewellery, and she came across a little gold ring that belonged to her great aunt Alice, and it's got a little letter A engraved on it. And she was showing it me and telling me about our Aunt Alice. And she dropped it, and it dropped on the floor and fell between the cracks of the floorboards. And of course, she really couldn't get it out. I tried to fish it out with, you know, a coat hanger and all sorts of stuff. Could not get it out at all. And because of the structure of the shed, you couldn't tear the floorboards up either. And I said, look, we know where it's gone. It's not going to go anywhere. When, in a few years' time, when the shed is taken down, we'll remember where it is and we'll get it. And she says, oh, all right, I suppose so. I'm a bit upset, but we thought nothing of it. Then, about 2 weeks later, I was pottering in the garden and Jen was in the shed. And all of a sudden, I heard this shriek coming from the back of the shed. And I said, what's up? Went running in, and she was there absolutely pale. I couldn't say anything. I said, come here, come here, come here. And I said, what? And she says, look, and she pointed down, and on the floor in front of her was the ring, the exact ring with the letter A on it. And it was balanced on its edge. It wasn't just lying flat, it was lying on its edge.
Oh, wow.
She said, I was just, you know, doing something here with the furniture, and I just saw a glint in, you know, something dropping from the ceiling, something gold, looked down, and, you know, and it was really scary. And so things like that happen around her, you know. And another occasion in there, she bought some furniture from Windsor, actually, from an old, the estate of an old deer that had died. And it had been in there for months before we got round to doing it. But one day she was in there, and it was one of the days where the shed had got this really strange atmosphere. And she heard a distinct coughing of a child from the back of the shed. Well, the shed was packed to the gunwales, and you couldn't slide a Rizzler between the furniture, so we knew there was nobody in there. But it was a really distinct coughing of a child. And she thought, I think I'll leave it for today. So we went out. A couple of days later, we went back in, and we were looking at the furniture that we bought from Windsor. Opened one of the drawers, and underneath the newspaper, in one of the drawer linings, was an obituary for a little girl called Connie, who died aged 8 at Windsor of TB. You know, it was the daughter of the woman that we bought the furniture of. Now, whether Connie's spirit somehow was still attached to this furniture, or whether they know that gens are sensitive and make their presence felt, I don't know. But things like that, we had some very, very odd experiences in that shed. And I suppose the footnote to it is, several years later, I met the bloke who I bought it off, and he said, how did you get on with the shed? I said, wonderful, apart from the fact that it's haunted. And he said, you what? And I was telling him all these stories. And he said, well, I should have told you when I sold it you. I bought it from Heathrow Airport, and it was the temporary mortuary.
Oh, Lord.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you very much for that. So, yeah, very lucky. Now, there's a few little stories from the shed in the book as well, because we live just outside Windsor. I thought without stretching the point too much, I could put some of our experiences in there.
Yeah, certainly should do.
Andy?
Yes, I was just going to say I had a similar airport-type experience quite recently with these guys on a ghost investigation we carried out earlier this year. And if you
Really?
worked out, yeah, it was amazing. I'm down in Essex, and they're of course in Manchester, so I only occasionally get a chance to pop up and see them. And we went to a location that, funny enough, had antiques in it. It was like an antiques warehouse as well.
Oh.
And wandering around, I'd noticed a little pair of gold-rimmed spectacles with no glass in, just the little spectacles themselves sitting on a shelf. I mean, I hadn't gone very near them. They were there, just happened to notice them. And we were just sort of taking a bit of a break in our investigation. And I had my glasses on top of my head. They usually sit there quite nicely. And I just sat down to look at something. And I pulled the glasses down and I couldn't see anything through them. I put the glasses off.
Yeah.
And it was the glasses. It was the gold-rimmed glasses that I hadn't even touched. They were on my head.
Isn't that amazing?
And I'm so used to having them up there that I hadn't even given it a second thought. That I suddenly thought, I don't remember actually putting the glasses on my head. And then I'm thinking, this is not my glasses. How the hell did these get on my head? So I couldn't tell you when they got there. I was just aware they were there when I went to look through them, and they were not my glasses at all. But I mean, there was like furniture in the way. I could have got to the shelf, but I didn't go that very close to it. It's really strange.
It's amazing, isn't it? There's something in it. There really is.
Absolutely.
And, yeah. And we lose things as well all the time, And I'm assuming somewhere, at the other end is it's been apported to somebody else.
Yeah. So you say you're more of a researcher these days than an investigator,
Yeah.
Brian. But
I think
sorry,
I've got the time to investigate now, but of course I'm in the wrong part of the world.
yeah, I was just going to ask: have you ever found any real ghost stories in France?
We have. I've done an article recently, actually, for a publication called The Long Dock Sun, and they're not as into it over here.
No.
They seem ever so reluctant to talk about it. And
Right.
but there's loads here, but they're not half as well known as they should be.
Yeah.
And the ones that are written about, of course, they're written in French. There's no English stories here.
No.
So I've done a couple of articles recently and pulled a few together. So yeah, I'll probably be doing a bit more of that. I mean, it's a shame that I'm not in England in some ways, because I'd like to have gone round some of the old haunts.
Yeah.
And done a bit of proper paranormal detective work. But at the moment, it is pretty much researching rather than investigating.
Now I want to talk about go away from ghost hunting a bit. Now your current project is London Murder Stories.
Yeah.
Where you're examining historic murders committed around the capital over the last 350 years.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering, which ones are you actually looking at?
Well, I'm still writing them. I'm probably about a third of the way through the book soon. And I think I made the decision not to do Jack the Ripper.
Okay.
Good idea.
Because it's been done to death,
Yeah.
and I couldn't add an awful lot more. I haven't got any of my own pet theories. Bram's Hill, by the way, there's a walking stick on display at Bramshill House, the haunted place I was talking about earlier. And it used to belong to Inspector Aberline.
Oh, yeah.
And it's carved with a head on the top of the person that he thought was Jack the Ripper. And it's in a little case at Bramshill House. But anyway, I digress. So, yeah, I said to the publisher, if you don't mind, I'd rather not do Jack the Ripper because it has been done to death and the whole book would be Jack the Ripper.
Yeah.
You know? So I'm doing lots of others, really interesting ones, but some of which are quite obscure as well. There is a link to Jack the Ripper, though, because 10 years after Jack the Ripper, somebody else got murdered at Miller's Court in the bedroom next to the bedroom where the Ripper victim was.
Right.
So, so I won't tell you about that just yet.
Okay.
But that's an interesting one. There is a little story I can tell you. It's because it links Windsor and London and the murder story.
Okay.
Because it's a murder story with a ghost.
Right.
And it was going back in, I think it was 1839.
Right.
1839, there was a housemaid who worked at a very posh address in Belgravia. And she shared the house duties with a footman called William Marchant. And William Marchant was quite a nice, educated chap, a bit shy. And all the other servants there used to tease him, because he was a bit shy of girls and stuff. And young Elizabeth Plainton used to flirt and stuff. And this one day she was flashing her garter, I think, and the cook says, "Go and see if you can get hold of that garter, William." And he says, "Oh no, I'm shy." She says, "Go on, don't be bashful." Anyway, there was a bit of banter going on there and a bit of horseplay. And then it was all very peaceable and nice, well-natured. And then the cook goes out, and all the other servants go out, and leaving young William and Elizabeth in the house together. And it looks as though the horseplay then continued, because she starts teasing him, and he, for some strange reason, has a complete transformation of personality. He goes upstairs and finds a cutthroat razor. Comes downstairs and promptly cuts her throat. And then comes to his senses and realises what he's done and then just flees. Anyway, the cook comes back later, can't get in the house, and thinks, "Oh, I've left them two in here, I wonder what they're up to." So they break in the house and find that she's lying there in a pool of blood with her throat cut. And to start off with, they think she's committed suicide or something, and then they realise, of course, that young William's gone. Anyway, William is legged it, and he's got a friend at Eton, and so decides to make his way to Windsor. But that first night after the murder, he's haunted by the ghost of Elizabeth Paynton. And whenever, even when he shuts his eyes, she's there. Every time he opens his eyes, she's there saying, "You've killed me, you're going to have to give yourself up." Drives him absolutely mad. Spends a sleepless night. The next day, when daylight comes, he goes to Eton, and he goes to Eton Church, the church at the college there, and prays for forgiveness. And when he looks to the side of him on the pew, she's there. The bloody figure of his murder victim is there, and absolutely drives him to distraction, to the extent that he runs to a policeman, and says, "Look, she's after me. Look at her over there," and points to somebody. Of course, the copper can't see anything and thinks he's crazed. And he says, "No, I've just killed a servant in Belgravia," and the cop didn't know anything about it. Thought he was just mad, but took him into custody anyway, and of course found out that he had indeed killed her. And all the time he was being carted back to the Nick, he was talking about the ghost that was behind him, that stayed with him, in fact, even in the cells until he was subsequently executed for a murder.
Wow.
But, very interesting one. That. But there's a few like that where the ghosts of victims have sort of driven the murderers to confess.
Yeah. Now, you say that you spend most time haunting flea markets as well as writing the club's ghost club journals and chasing down ghosts rather than criminals. But I believe one of your biggest projects is digging for information about George Allen's murder of his 4, 6 and 9-year-old children in Upper Mayfield.
Oh yes. That's an interesting story as well, isn't it? But, it's stories like that, and there's another very similar one where the family of a police superintendent in Staffordshire is murdered as well. So I'm just writing that one up as well at the moment. But lots of interesting ones.
I bet. So, but Andy, is there any other questions you'd like to ask?
I was just going to say about that idea of the ghosts haunting the victim, the murderers after the murder. You have to wonder, of course, there's a psychological element there.
Exactly, yeah. Is it just conscience? Is it guilty conscience, or was there something there?
It's just interesting that you get these kind of experiences. It could still be that is guilt and conscience is causing it, but it still could is actually there and come to say right. Yeah, so it's very simple for both.
Yeah, I was reading about one the other day in Exeter. I haven't got the full details here. It was about 1720.
Yeah.
This old chap who ran the Red Cow at Exeter, the publican, went out one day to collect some money that was owed to him, and he was owed quite a lot of money. Went to the neighbouring town, and while he was in the neighbouring town, he had a drink, and in the pub he met a bloke that he hadn't seen for 20 years. He used to be a really good friend. And anyway, they spend the day getting bladdered, and the licensee says, well, I've just got to go and collect some money from a bloke that owes me some money, but I own the pub now at Exeter, the Red Lion. How do you fancy coming back? And this bloke says, oh, that'd be lovely, yeah, we can catch up then. Anyway, the licensee goes and collects this load of money, and then they make their way back to the Red Cow. They get back home half cut, and the licensee's wife isn't very happy because he's brought this strange bloke back with him, and they're both, 7 sheets to the wind. And he says, can you just go and cut us some sandwiches up? We're going to have a bit of a sesh here and catch up. Anyway, she's not amused, so she does them something to eat and goes to bed. She wakes up in the middle of the night, and he's still not in bed. So she goes downstairs, about 3 o'clock in the morning, and the visitor is there, absolutely sparko, fast asleep, snoring away. No sign of her husband. And she says, where's he gone? And they wake him up, and he's half cut. She says, well, I don't know, I ain't seen him for hours. Anyway, they go looking for him, can't find him at all. He's never, ever seen again, the licensee. Anyway, there's a bit of a hue and cry, and this visitor then gets accused of murdering him. And they say, well, look, he went out that day to collect a load of money. It's funny that he's bumped into him, and now he's gone missing. What's obviously happened, complete with all his gold sovereigns still in his pocket. And what had happened is he'd gone for a pee in the middle of the night and fell face first to the crap and drowned and just sunk to the bottom.
Oh, God, what a way to go, though. Oh.
Yes. And the poor old bloody visitor gets hanged for nothing, really. So whether or not there was a ghost, we don't know, but if there was a ghost, he got it wrong.
I don't know. So what is the best story you've written? Sorry, Steve, we'll get you to you in a minute.
It was linked
all right. Go on, quickly ask it now then.
No, it's not. It's just an observation.
Go on then.
I have actually read out. There is a case in America that a ghost actually kind of give evidence and caught its whole murderer.
Oh,
really?
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was a ghost of a young woman who was killed by her husband. And the ghost kept appearing to her mother and saying, he did this, you'll find this here. And when they checked it all, they did, and he was found guilty and hanged.
There you go.
And it's the only one to date that's actually on the records.
All right, okay.
Wow.
So what's your best story that you've enjoyed writing about, Brian?
Well, don't know whether I've got a favourite. I mean, I've enjoyed writing about Windsor Castle.
Yeah.
There are lots of ghosts associated with that. At least 7 kings and queens associated with it. And, scores and scores of ghosts that are still being seen today. Yeah. And what was interesting about that is that a surprising number of the royal family in the past have seen ghosts as well.
Yeah.
Including Edward VII, who saw several ghosts there. And yet, he issued an edict in about 1904 that if anybody that worked at Windsor Castle talked about ghosts, they would be sacked on the spot. Which is one of the reasons why during the 20th century a lot of the ghost stories just stopped. And it's not because he didn't believe in it at all, but it was a bit of a pragmatic decision, really. It's the 3,000 people it takes to run the castle in those days. A bit fewer now. But what was happening is the ghosts used to be seen. They used to spread like wildfire around the staff, and they just used to leave in droves, or they'd refuse to go into places, or they'd only go in certain rooms mob-handed. You know, so he really came down hard and sacked several people for talking to the press or to other people outside the castle about ghosts. But there are lots of examples of where the royal family have seen ghosts. And of course, the most famous one is the sighting of Queen Elizabeth in the Royal Library by a Grenadier Guard, and that was in 1897 during Victoria's Jubilee, and there's a Grenadier Guardsman there by the name of Lieutenant Glynn. Now he was sitting in the library, just reading through some books, I think, when he saw what was believed to be the ghost of Queen Elizabeth in the library. Now that story has been so exaggerated over the years; it's been quite difficult to get to the truth of the original account. Some of the accounts are really fanciful. One of them has him jumping up and gets so terrified by the ghost that he runs his sword through her. And just ridiculous stories. But I've done a fair bit of research on that one, and I think I've got it as accurate as we possibly can, almost in his own words. And he was 26 at the time. He was a lieutenant in the Grenadier Guards and was stationed at Victoria Barracks in Windsor. Comes from a very well-connected family. His dad was a military hero of the Crimean War. So in terms of his credibility as a witness, he's pretty good. His uncle was the Bishop of Peterborough. His grandfather was a baronet, and he wasn't a fanciful bloke at all. Very modest, serious, and academic. And he took his role in the elite Grenadier Guards very seriously. And he was quite used to being at Windsor Castle. But one afternoon, about 4 o'clock, I think it was, in February 1897, it was a bit quiet, so he'd gone to the library. and while he was sitting there, he had an experience, and I'll read out his words actually. His words were told through his mum, because when the story hit the press, it just went ballistic, and everybody was trying to interview him, and he fled to Scotland with the regiment to try to escape all the publicity, because I think he was a bit naive in being so honest about what had taken place, and I don't think the royal family were very pleased by what he said either. Now, whether he fled to Scotland or whether he was sent to Scotland remains a bone of contention, but he was up in Scotland and he was out of the way of all the reporters. But he did send a letter back to his mum explaining exactly what had happened. And she went on to say that it's perfectly true that my son has witnessed something abnormal. He tells me he was sitting in the library of Windsor Castle reading a book, the history of Dorsetshire to be exact. As he read, he became aware of someone passing in the inner library. He looked up and he saw a female figure in black, with black lace on the head falling onto the shoulders. The figure passed across the library towards a corner, which was out of view as my son sat, and he didn't take much notice, thinking it was just somebody going into the inner reading room. It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and an attendant soon afterwards came in to close the place up. My son said, "Who was that lady who was working in the inner room?" And the attendant said, "There's no one else in the library, sir." My son said, "No, I can assure you that a lady has just walked across the inner room and gone into that inner room." Then where could she be? Asked the attendant, having ascertained that there was nobody in the room. "Well, she must have gone out of a door in the corner," said my son, indicating the corner to which the figure had passed. "But there is no door," said the attendant. So he'd seen this figure disappear into a closed room and vanish. My son said nothing about the incident, and I didn't think much about it. I understand until Mr. Holmes, the librarian, asked him about it. Now, Mr. Holmes was absolutely paranoid about seeing the ghost of Elizabeth, because it had been seen so many times at the Royal Library, and he really wanted to see it. He'd worked there for donkey's years and had never seen it. So as soon as he heard this incident, he came rushing down and started to interrogate the lieutenant about what he'd seen. Asked by Mr. Holmes to describe the figure he had seen, my son did so, and Mr. Holmes replied that my son had seen the apparition of Queen Elizabeth. So the suggestion that it was Queen Elizabeth was put to him by the librarian, because all he saw was, a woman in black. Mr. Holmes added that there were records that this apparition haunted these rooms, but Lieutenant Glenn was the first man in our time who had seen it. The Dean of Windsor also asked my son about it, and several members of the royal family interviewed him about the subject. As for Mr. Holmes, I am given to understand that he has spent many nights and days in the library since, in the hopes of seeing a visitation. And the father then came in and said, "If my son says he's seen anything, then you may take it from us that he's seen something. He's a fresh, honest English boy. He might only be a subaltern, but he's fond of field sports. And like most guardsmen, he's fond of reading. But he wouldn't exaggerate anything a hair's breadth." So they really stood up for him. Anyway, there was a clamour from the press to try to get an interview with Lieutenant Glynn, who by now was in the Isles of Islay in Scotland. But he sent a telegram to the Daily Mail saying, "Look, I've sent a statement to my mum. If you want to take it from that, that's all you're gonna see." And that was it really. But he got himself into an awful lot of trouble as a result. The Daily Mail then turned up and went to the library, and they do a little spiel in the Daily Mail in 1897. And it says, "Mr. Holmes, the librarian, conducted me to the scene of the alleged apparition. He pointed out the chair occupied by Lieutenant Glynn, which stands on the east side of the first room, and I seated myself in it. Immediately before me was a large globe, looking past which a few steps lead into a gallery, the sides of which are lined with books. On the south side of the gallery, which was being built by Queen Elizabeth, used to be a picture gallery, and she was accustomed to walk there whenever she reflected on statecraft. Mr. Holmes said that this gallery has a reputation of being haunted by the ghost of Queen Elizabeth, and the last sighting had been 27 years before. But it turns out that the room that he saw her disappear into, which by that time was a dead end, used to lead out onto the terrace outside, and that used to be the place that she used to promenade. But poor old Lieutenant Glynn, he was castigated by the army and by the royal family, called the gullible fool, called hinged, and all sorts. He got a lot of stick, and so he kept his head down then for a few years after that. But he went on to have a very successful military career and ended up being a lieutenant general. But would never talk about it after because of all the crap that he got into, really, on that occasion. But that's probably the last authenticated sighting of Queen Elizabeth I, which is, over 100 years ago now. Right. Whether or not there have been other sightings, but they're just being suppressed by the castle, we will never know.
Yeah. We've got Ghost Rider in the chat room. He's asking whether you've ever been to the Crime Museum, the Black Museum.
I have, yeah, fantastic.
And have there been any items associated to hauntings there?
Just trying to think, actually. Because it is on... It is open to the public now, isn't it? When I went, it was just closed. It was only coppers and detectives that could go and see it because it was Scotland Yard. But now they've taken it out. I can't remember which museum, but it's this month. It's out in one of the museums of London. They've taken hundreds of exhibits out there. Really interesting. I'm just trying to think whether I can recall any that have got some supernatural connections, and off the top of my head, I can't, I'm afraid.
Okay.
It's the Museum of London.
That's it, yeah.
In the major exhibit.
It's well worth going. I mean, very, very gruesome. Really gruesome. Some of the stuff, it's, fine.
Right, okay. So, what would you like to write about next? I know you're falling over yourself with all these stories, but what would you like to write about? What's the next thing that you're thinking of? Because you seem the sort of person, you've got the Eton and Windsor one coming out soon. You're working on London murder things, but I bet you've got something else there in that background.
But it's this, the one I'm calling Professor Pyewacket's Compendium of Mysteries. That's my sort of working title, because it's going to be a mop-up for all these sort of weird stories.
Yeah.
So I want to get a collection of those together, and I can't really compartmentalize it. I don't know what to call it.
Yeah.
But it's just
I think you should keep that title personally.
Yes. Yeah. And of course, Pyewacket was one of the cats, wasn't they, from one of the witches, from the Witchfinder General.
Yeah.
One of the witches that he persecuted there had a cat called Pyewacket.
Do you want Andy?
I knew the name from somewhere and I couldn't think where it was from, yeah.
Yeah, one of Matthew Hopkins' victims' cats.
I don't know. So
yeah, one of them. So things with, spontaneous human combustion and teleportation and UFOs and aliens, just bring them all together and they're just not too heavy read, nothing too academic, but just a collection of something like that. So perhaps when I've done that, I can come back on and tell you about it. Yeah,
definitely. It's been great having you on the show anyway, Brian. Where can people read about your articles?
The best place now, I've just literally this week set up a website. I've been on about it for years, but I've now got www.brianlangston.com, all one word.
Yeah.
And if you go on there, there's about 20 stories on there that you can read right away, and I'm sort of adding to them every day.
Right, okay. And as I say, it's been great having you on the show. You've been a very, very fun guest.
Thank you.
You're a very jolly chap, aren't you?
Oh, yes.
You're a very good storyteller. You really should have been on Jack and Noreen.
Yes.
Are you sitting comfortably?
Yes, you would have given Bernard Cribbin a run for his money.
In all seriousness, I would certainly consider doing an audio version of your book, Brian. Definitely.
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, that's
definitely.
Great idea, Andy.
Yeah, so something else for you to get your tongue around?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thanks again.
Thank you.
Please come back on the show sometime next year and
Will do.
Tell us about Pallywackle or whatever her name is.
Professor Pallywackle. Professor
Phineas Pyewacket.
Pallywacket.
Pallywagon.
And whatever else is coming out. Okay, keep us informed.
Super. Will do. Thanks ever so much.
Good night, my love. Bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.
Bye, then.
So until next week, it's good night from me.
And it's good night from her.
And it's good night from me.
From you. Until next time, all that's left to say is keep the paranormal friendly. Good night and God bless.
Good night, guys. Have a great week.
This is where it's at.
Hello, Harry Price here. Good evening. If there's nothing myself and everybody else enjoy here on the other side more is the sit back and relax and listen to Parasearch Radio with its paranormal news, views and reviews from across the UK and beyond. Make sure to find out more about them on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web, whatever they are, to keep up to date with all their broadcasts throughout the week. And I hope you enjoy them as much as we do over here. Hello? Is anybody there?